Yeah, last week we had 8 interested parties on the call. We weren't able to get through all the questions. We do a question and answer towards the end of the call.
And I'll keep the background brief this time because I've got a call with Mike O'Connor at 11. And I've got calls booked through 4 today. So today seems to be, I guess everyone thinks Tuesdays are supposed to be slow days. And they're like, yeah, that's a good time to book on the Calendly. The Calendly has been great and it's been a nightmare simultaneously.
Yeah. Gotta control
so
that.
Yeah. Dave, what market are you in California?
He
had it muted. I'm currently in Temecula, Marietta, which is just north of San Diego, but I'm moving to Savannah, Georgia.
Yeah.
And what market is Greg in?
Greg, are you there? Let me just see here.
I did think it was odd, and I probably should have known since the current outflow of citizens is out of California, not the other way around. And so I did, when you were talking earlier, I was like, someone moving from Savannah to California doesn't sound right, but so it makes more sense.
We're tending to go the other way, but the problem is there are too many Californians taking their politics with them, and ruining other states.
Well, that's what happened to North Carolina. But Savannah's fantastic. I like it more than Charleston. I think Charleston became real touristy and Savannah's kind of under the radar still, and it offers the same kind of amenities and ambiance without the touristy thing side of it.
Costa, Greg is in Grand Rapids, and at some point we can have him meet with Mitch Urbats.
Yeah, and Peter Colvin, because Peter Colvin lives in Grand Rapids, and our architect lives in Grand Rapids. So that's perfect. All right, so I'll kick things off because no one else has joined. Thanks for being on the call. These calls have been super beneficial for discussing the franchise and what we're trying to do and how we're trying to scale. And so I typically just go into a brief background about us, and then we get into Q&A, which has been the best part of these calls. So my background was in finance. My educational background was in finance, and then my first working jobs was retail banking at TD Bank, brokerage, TD Ameritrade, then asset management at Merrill Lynch, and then lastly, before becoming a full-time entrepreneur, business owner at T. Rowe Price in Baltimore. And when I was at T. Rowe Price, I had jumped from job to job to job, and I kept wondering, maybe the next one, maybe the next one, maybe the next one. And then what I think I realized was the entrepreneurial side of me was always just nagging at me. And so I started looking for a business, and I thought maybe if I had this side business, it'll scratch that itch, and I'll stop, having a wandering eye for different jobs. And so I wanted to look at businesses that were manager centric, but not skilled manager centric, meaning not a key employee who, if they call out, then you're shutting down for the day. And so I looked at a lot of different models. I ultimately found a situation in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where this elderly couple was basically checked out of the business. They had let the revenue decline pretty steadily from 2007 to 2013. And they were willing to offer a fairly significant seller held note for me to take the business over. The manager had been in place for 10 years at that point. And I said, you know what, let me run this thing from my desk at T. Rowe Price. So it took about 6 months for me to jump into it full time. I was just having a little bit too much fun running the business. There's a lot of parts of business ownership that are really fun. There's obviously the not so glamorous side, like the 2 a.m. phone calls of someone, the alarm going off, false alarm, or the phone call from your distributor saying that we ran out of XYZ product. But 99% of the time, I really have enjoyed this journey and owning my own business and creating a brand, and just being able to be part of the community in a more significant way through the business. So we opened a second store in Dillsburg, Pennsylvania, to kind of validate the model. Dillsburg, Pennsylvania is a town of 6,000 people, and we had some pretty immediate success, and that store has been around since 2015 now. So it's had a nice long, it's made that leap over the 5-year barrier that a lot of business statisticians will tell you is the most difficult one to hit. And then we opened a store in Chicago, in a suburb of Chicago, Mount Prospect, and that was really the true test of how absentee this model really could be. And so from a very early point in time, absentee was ingrained in the DNA of how I ran this business. And so whether it was third-party apps or just standard operating procedures, we put in place functions that allowed us to have that store be 600, 700 miles away from where I live. And so then the fourth store was in Pittsburgh. So we came back to Pennsylvania. And then the fifth store was in Youngstown, in a town called Boardman, Ohio, which is right on the border of Newcastle, Pennsylvania, about 40 minutes away from Pittsburgh. And that was the first store that we essentially did a full build out, whereas there was no equipment. I was able to control the UI, UX of the layout. I was able to design the facility to be in accordance with how I want to train the employees and how the flow chart of our business is. And from there, we've always had a consumer facing business. We've always been very consumer centric. While I was still at T. Rowe Price, I would spend a lot of time looking at Yelp reviews back when Yelp was still relevant of some of the larger competitors, and basically reverse engineered what the consumer wanted. And that, I think, was a heavy part of figuring out success in this business. And so when we got to location number 10, I started thinking about what would be the best way to scale this for operators. I could have continued down the road of just opening corporate stores and had a really nice business, but I really did feel as though there was a gap in the space from the consumer standpoint. Some of the larger players, I think, neglected the consumer base and had been on top and been so large for so long. They got kind of lazy with credibility, lazy with reputation, and lazy with the actual customer service side of things. And so I thought there would be an opportunity there. So the first real obstacle was the building itself. If any of you ever go on crexi.com or LoopNet and type in oil change building, oil change facility, or quick lube, these buildings are built for upwards of 800, 900, 1.2, 1.5 million dollars, and then they're resold to investors for a 6 cap, 5 cap, 8 cap at $3-4 million. And that puts a huge burden on the operator inside the building, because if you have a lease payment of $15,000 a month, then you can't do only oil changes. It's just going to be too steep of a hill to climb from a volume standpoint. And so we designed a building, we designed a facility that gets those numbers more in line with the ability to do oil changes only. And so our building is very streamlined. There's no waiting room. Much of our business is built on transparency as opposed to ignorance. We want our customers to know what's going on inside the bay. We're not shuffling them off to a windowless waiting room where they can't see what's happening inside their store. And so inside their car. And that's really resonated with a lot of people, and it's shown in our franchise sales, because there's basically everyone has an oil change story. And when we teamed up with Fran Devco, it was important for me to be teamed up with someone that has taken a brand from emerging to national and knows what pitfalls to avoid, and has helped guide and be a good steward of our brand. And between Chris and Michael and the Fran Devco team, they've been amazing stewards of our brand. And Michael, unfortunately, has multiple personal stories that help him tell the story of what we're trying to do a little bit better with. I think it was Firestone or Pep Boys, and
Jiffy Lube.
and and so it's been a great journey. So we can go straight into Q&A because I've got 15 minutes. We only got 2 participants, so it shouldn't be too tough to get multiple questions in. But feel free. We do have a discovery day every single month, and virtually and in person. That's where we really get into the secret sauce. So, we try to keep the Q&A on the founders calls more macro rather than in the weeds, because we do get into the weeds on discovery day.
Yeah, and just so you know, that one coming up is the 16th and 17th of March. It's a Wednesday and Thursday.
So I guess I'll go ahead and start if you're ready for questions.
Sure, Greg.
So one thing I was thinking about was, where does the oil come from, both in terms of where is it pumped out of the ground and where is it refined, and how is Costa, or what are they doing to make sure that we have a steady supply so we don't have supply chain problems?
So 90% of motor oil in the US is domestically blended. There's only about 7 real serious blenders in the country, which means all of the major oil companies farm out the actual blending of motor oil. It's a much different refining process than gasoline. And so companies like BP and Shell, they'll utilize geographically placed blenders. And at the end of the day, motor oil is like a soup recipe. You just have your ingredients. You have base oil, you have viscosity, which determines how thick or thin the oil is. And then you have your additive packs. And that's kind of where the differentiators come. But a lot of these companies, especially mid-tier oil companies, will use house oils from the blender and then just slap their label on it and then charge a marketing markup. And so there's actually a lot of oil on the market that has 2 different brands, but is actually the same exact product. So for us, while we don't mandate that our franchisees use any specific distributor, we use a company corporately called PetroChoice. And PetroChoice is one of few national distributors. The logistics of motor oil is very difficult. And so a lot of these distributors will use sub-distributors so that they can try to hit all these markets. PetroChoice has done a really good job of strategically placing their own warehouses so that they have fulfillment in all of the different regions. And Greg, what market are you in again?
Grand Rapids.
Grand Rapids. So we have PetroChoice actually has, I believe, a corporate-owned Indiana facility that would deliver to Grand Rapids. And we can check that for you. But in any case, we don't see supply chain issues from the oil side. We see it more on the filter side. So we have three main cogs. We have oil, we have filters, and we have additives. Additives, and really they should be called ancillary products, not additives, because it includes wiper blades, air filters, and then a variety of pop and pour chemicals that are just upsell or cross-sell items. And so I'm looking at PetroChoice's map. They have a corporate warehouse in LaPorte, Indiana. That would deliver to Grand Rapids. They also have a sub-distributor in Bay City, Michigan, but I think the corporate warehouse would probably be the point of contact. But in any case, oil filters are typically made from aluminum, and there has been a global oil filter shortage. Fortunately for us, I have attempted to vertically integrate things as much as possible, not in the sense of full vertical integration, but having supplemental product lines that have our labels on it. So we have private label Costa oil filters, we have private label packaged oil. And our private label oil filters, which had typically been limited to online sales, I was able to distribute to our internal stores, and we were able to basically weather the oil filter supply chain issues. Most oil filters in the US are domestically made. There's only a handful of oil filter manufacturers, but the materials that make the filters although the filters themselves are made in the US, the materials are typically imported from China, most likely, I would assume, for the aluminum. But I've actually never asked our filter distributor. Greg, did you need any more flavor on that question, or did that pretty much answer it?
That mostly answered it. How about like the oil, where is it, what oil fields is it coming from? Is it,
Base
US or?
Base oil comes from a variety of different places, and the blenders really don't discriminate on where the base oil comes from, because the end product is so far from base oil by the time it's blended. Our oil is not re-refined oil, although there is a stigma around re-refined oil. Re-refined oil is actually a better base oil, but the consumer base hasn't been educated on that enough to have the confidence in companies using re-refined oil. But from a crude oil standpoint, Petro Choice, I'm sure I can find out. We were a net import country for like 3 months in 20. I can't remember. We actually finally were a net export, not import. We're back to being a net import, but we at some point during 2016 through 2020, we were a net export oil producing country. But I can get you that answer, Greg, specifically from Petro Choice, at least. The other distributors I can't really speak to, but I can definitely get the answer for Petro Choice.
Okay, thank
Greg,
you.
are you concerned about what's going on right now geopolitically, that we will be able to? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's basically where my head was going.
Yeah, we're brushing up against $100 a barrel right now for the first time since I think like 2014, and so that's going to be largely driven by whatever happens in Russia and Ukraine. But the actual the supply of the oil will never be a problem. It's just the cost will always be passed down to us, and we are the last. Besides the retail consumer, we are the last level of passing on that cost. And so when you are the producer, you can mark it up however you need to mark it up. And then it gets into the logistics chain where transportation, corrugated plastic, all of those things will impact the cost getting to the refiner. And then the refiner then gets more logistics involved with corrugated plastic and steel drums, the cost of steel drums and things like that. Train carts, whatever the rate for train carts are, because a lot of these blenders still have their oil delivered via trains, and then they have to turn it into motor oil, and then motor oil gets distributed to us, and then we have to pass on the cost to the end consumer. And when all is said and done, that the consumer really doesn't have much of a say, because oil changes are a quasi utility. Like every single car that's not a Tesla requires an oil change.
Yeah, and in general, I was also a little bit thinking of just supply chain problems in general, which obviously the country is going through various versions of that. And so, I just was wondering if we've got systems in place to make sure we're not impacted by that kind of problem.
What we saw on the oil side was more the delay in the chemical additives making it to the blenders. There's a lot of base oil available, and so we've never had an issue getting bulk oils. But when you get into more specific oils, that's where there's been delays, like the Dexos oils. There was actually, and this has nothing to do with the pandemic or anything that's going on overseas, there was a chemical facility in Illinois that caught fire, and they manufactured, I believe, a large percentage of the chemicals that are required to have that Dexos certification, which is the GM oil. That created long tail supply chain issues. But for the most part, the oil's made and blended domestically, so there has not been a ton of issues, just pricing fluctuation based on geopolitical actions.
Okay.
David, do you have any questions for Costa?
I have a few, but I don't know if this is the venue for it or not. Some of it has to do with our long-term contracts with Petro Choice. You know, as a Costa Oil franchisee, if I have a problem getting oil, Jiffy Lube has a problem getting oil. Valvoline has, their quick change has a problem getting oil. It's going to be an industry-wide thing. But have you secured long-term contracts with companies like Petro Choice? Do you have your own special blend that you tell them this is the formula I want you to use? Or do you say, look, I want the same thing you're running for Valvoline, branded for me, and I want 50,000 barrels or whatever? How do you handle your orders? Is it a Costa blend, or do you just facility run me a batch?
Yeah, we utilize Petro Choice's house oil, and it typically comes from a blending facility out of Bensalem, Pennsylvania. They do have a blending facility in Kansas that actually they source, refine, and blend the oil themselves. That none of our stores at the moment get products from them. Maybe packaged oil might come from them. Delivering bulk oil is very regional. There's only a certain distance that the tank trucks, are willing to go before it's not economical for them. So they do utilize other blenders, and they'll just have a house oil recipe. All we care about is that it meets API and SAE specifications. At the end of the day, a core belief of our organization is that the average quick lube consumer is not concerned with brand. They're more concerned with the experience. They're more concerned with the price, and they're more concerned with the environment. So if we nail those three things, if we have a nice facility, if we have pleasant employees, and the product itself is at a price point. Now, quick lubes can, demand a premium because we're selling time back. We're a convenience play. All other automotive shops use oil changes as a loss leader. So they're advertising a $19.99 oil change or a $24 oil change, and they're taking a loss on that so they can get the customer up on a lift and, say, hey, you need new tie rods. You have, you need this, you need that. That's not what we do. We're selling people convenience. And so we are not as concerned with brand. Kind of anecdotally, if brand were the most important thing in a quick lube, I truly believe Mobil 1 Express Lube would be the most common quick lube in the country, and they barely have a footprint anymore. I think they are prevalent in Indiana, Michigan, Ohio a little bit, but they're not a very large chain compared to some of the other chains. Same thing goes for Castrol, because if I were to poll 10 customers that come through my doors and I were to ask, what are your top 3 oil brands? You'd hear Pennzoil, you'd hear Mobil 1, and you'd hear some variation of Amsoil, Castrol, and Valvoline. And so Mobil 1 is always in that conversation, and they just, that's not something that people who want a fast oil change are concerned with. That's a core belief of ours, and that allows us to use house oil. We are not mandating that you use Petro Choice. You can use a Castrol distributor. You can use a Citgo distributor. That's fine. We would give our opinion on it, but at the end of the day, it's the franchisee's call as a business owner. As long as it meets API, as long as it meets SAE, that's at the end of the day the only thing we care about, because you can always mark up to what you need to make the right margin. So Petro Choice is actually the largest Mobil 1 distributor in the entire country, and we carry some packaged Mobil 1 products, but we charge a lot of money for a Mobil 1 oil change, and there's a certain segment of the customer base that will just pay it. And so our Mobil 1 oil change is, I think, up to $120 at this point for the first 5 quarts in a spin-on oil filter.
Yeah.
That being said, quick lubes in the 90s, early 2000s got into contracts and you don't want to get into contracts with oil because it is tied to the spot price of crude. And when you have geopolitical factors such as if Russia were to take over a portion of Ukraine today, oil could spike dramatically. And if your contract is tied to, because no oil company is going to give you pricing past 30 days. That's just not something they do. And so if you are in a contract and you are at the whim of whatever they want to charge you, as long as they give you, say, 30 days written notice, which is kind of the industry standard, then you're in a contract for a certain amount of gallons for the year, then you might be in trouble. And that's what happened to a lot of quick lubes. And they got in trouble because they got tied into these contracts where they had to buy a certain amount of oil, and then price of oil back in 2013, 14 went up to $140 a barrel. And they got caught with their pants down. So we use PetroChoice because they have national reach, they have a quality house oil, and that's and we've also come to terms with them that whatever the corporate stores are being offered as a price, our franchisees will be offered that same price. So all of the years of me, beating up PetroChoice on price is you guys are going to receive the benefits of all that work.
How many franchises do you have now? I understand that this is a fairly new business venture, franchising. How many franchise locations do you have or in the process of putting in versus how many corporate stores?
We have 14 corporate stores. We had 16. Two stores. I had leased all my facilities. I'm in the process of buying as many of my buildings as I possibly can. But we recently had a store in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. The landlord was based out of Philadelphia. He sold the building, and I had to vacate, which was really upsetting because it was a really good store. But the franchising started we were legally able to sell franchises February of 2021. We had our first discovery day, March of 2021. And I believe we've sold 70 territories in the past 11 months. Our first franchise that will be opening is in Mesa, Arizona. And we have several following in Georgia, the Atlanta area, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Kansas City might be one of our first stores, franchise locations as well. But Mesa is definitely going to be the first one.
So you've got 14 corporate stores and no franchises open at the time.
Correct.
And your corporate stores sound like they're an old-fashioned, bigger brick and mortar establishment than the kiosk that you're doing with.
Correct. With the exception of Westlake, Ohio, and Manor on the Lake, Ohio, which are the two concept stores, if you will. One is a 2-bay, one is a 1-bay. All of the other stores were either Jiffy Lubes that became vacant or whatever, however the store became available. I signed leases for them. They were not new construction.
And the franchises that are the two prototypes, are those included in the numbers that we were privy to during the previous phone calls? I know sometimes they won't use new franchises because they're not established. So the numbers that we saw and were provided, are those based on your concept stores, or are they based on your brick and mortar stores and what you think the franchise will do?
No, Westlake opened in March of 2021, and Manor on the Lake was opened in April of 2021. So they opened after the FDD had already been crafted. So we didn't have they didn't exist at the time of crafting the FDD. They also will not be on the 2022 FDD because they were not open for a full calendar year. What we tried to do with the reason we didn't have all of the stores on the 2021 FDD, and I left out high performing stores. I left out our Mount Prospect store. I left out our Youngstown store. But Youngstown is attached to a car wash. Mount Prospect is attached to an auto mall. So what I did for the 2021 FDD to create as close to a apples to apples comparison as possible, I did only freestanding buildings that had been open at least a calendar year and were not attached to either a car wash or an auto mall, and were less than 3 bays. So that's how the 4 stores that were selected ended up being selected.
Are you willing to provide the numbers on your 2 prototype stores?
I would have to defer to Michael on that, or probably my franchise attorney. We can't make financial representations outside of what's in the FDD, and that's the most regulated part of the FDD by the FTC is the financial representations. But
Yeah.
I
guess, yeah.
I can get back. I can get back to you on that, Dave.
I mean, I'm not asking for a financial representation, but if the store owners of those particular prototypes are willing to release their financials, which I'm guessing the prototypes are yours. If it was you as a store owner willing to release those numbers to a friend or somebody who's potentially looking at doing this, I believe that falls outside of the FDD, and it's one owner. Like you put me in contact with, or some of the other franchises I'm talking. Hey, call Billy Bob. He owns a store, and he'll be glad to talk to you. So if it was done on the guise of that, hey, I want to talk to the owner of a store like I'm going to have to see.
Yeah, franchisees are free to discuss numbers. I mean, we actually are regulated to the point where even talking about car count can be reversed engineered into a financial representation. So we have to be super careful of that because they're corporate owned stores. I'll look into, I get what you're getting at, Dave, and I'll talk to our back office and see if there's a way to relay those numbers, even if just like a snapshot of a month or something. But I want to just make sure we're completely covered before we do that, because it is the most sensitive part of franchising.
Yeah. Costa, a quick question. I know that some of the franchisees are very interested in buying existing locations. Is that potentially one of those that Ben Capel was looking at? And if so, then there's no problem. He can share numbers with future candidates.
We can probably, I mean, Ryan Pierce in Mesa would probably be the best, because he's going to have like very shortly a full month of running a store. Maybe even Daryl once we get, because we're beginning construction on his store in Warren, Ohio shortly. So and then Daryl could even talk about, Daryl might be able to be the person to kind of sideline that conversation and get to what Dave's asking without there being any.
And I appreciate that. Ryan in Mesa would be able to give me his baseline startup costs and what his breaking into the economy there would be, but his numbers wouldn't tell me once he's established 6 months in, 8 months into the program, where the name has gotten out there, you're starting to get some repeat business, you're getting some local feedback. That's what I'm interested in, is how is the kiosk mentality being accepted in the market, or are people preferring to go to the brick and mortar, and I want my car put up on a lift and be told what's wrong, and I tell them I don't want the work done, and I can have it done at my local shop. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of factors that go into that. Maybe the kiosk idea is not going to be well received. I have no problem with getting it on the ground floor of a business like this. I'm just interested in what the reception from the public is on a new store. But 6 to 8 months in, I might go there one time and decide, I did like to have my car put up on a lift, and told me that my tie rods were bad. I gave the business to my neighbor, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, the quick lube model itself is pretty well established at this point, and I think that it's in line with a lot of what's happening these days with other types of startups. People are trying to buy back time as much as possible. I mean, I didn't think that fast food drive-throughs could get even more efficient after they started giving numbers to the different meals. Like, well, how much faster can you get than rolling up to a menu and saying, give me a number one? But now, because of the pandemic accelerating these types of behaviors, you order it on the app, you show up, and they throw it through your window, and it's even faster now. And so I think that the quick lube industry itself has been pretty well before its time in terms of the concept of selling people their time back. Our model, we use the term kiosk strategically for real estate purposes, but at the end of the day, we have the same unit economics as a Jiffy Lube. We have the same unit economics as a Valvoline instant oil change. We have the same unit economics as any other quick lube. So the model itself is fairly established. And you did touch on a pretty important part, Dave. There is an inherent ramp-up period in the quick lube industry, in automotive in general, whereas everybody who comes to our grand opening, that car that comes through the doors is not coming back for another 3 months. So it's very important to distinguish between that first year, second year, third year, and fourth year, because there is a ramp-up period. And then versus other business models like a Chick-fil-A, when they have their grand opening, if you ate there on the grand opening, you can eat there 4 more times that same week, and you have instantaneous cash flow, positive cash flow overnight. We do have a ramp up period. But that being said, on the flip side, our customers are very sticky. We have it turns into a residual customer base that when you have incidents and pandemics and things like that, where you have that established customer base, we weathered that nicely. We had a very short slowdown in revenue in March and April because the government was telling people to stay home completely. But then what we found was people were just driving around to get out of the house. And we ended up having record months in August and September of 2020, which then were even beat even more the following year in 2021 because people moved out of cities. There was a mass fleeing from cities, and people were just putting more miles on their cars. So I think a lot of your concerns lie with the model itself, not specifically us, but we can share anything in regards to those 4 stores that are in the FDD, and we can talk about their build up to what the revenue is. I'm excited for our 2022 FDD because all 4 of those stores significantly increased revenue and car count prior to the 2021. And so our 2022 FDD is going to show that dramatic increase in cars.
When you put together your numbers, you say you can't give car counts. When you put your numbers together, how many oil changes do you put into the logarithm of a single kiosk or a single bay store oil changes per day? You say 10 minutes a car. Let's say you can only do 5. You're not going to be able to do 6 oil changes at 10 minutes. So let's say you average in a slack factor of 10%. You do 5 oil changes an hour if they're lined up. I mean, what numbers did you use for your?
Let me. So I was much more conservative on the ceiling of the 1 bay model in the beginning, and so I understand what you're getting at. And obviously, all other variables equal, a 2 bay is preferable because you can have a higher revenue ceiling because you can just do that much more output. We did 38 cars on the grand opening of the Menor on the Lake store, and that changed my perspective. And I feel comfortable saying that number to you because that's what happened. I have documentation to back that up. So if there was ever a claim of misrepresentation, that's a number that's in our point of sale system that says we did 38 cars on the grand opening in a single bay. And I was there the whole day. We had no disruption in customer experience. Now, there is a point in time where if a store is so busy, there will be a delta where the customer experience starts to decrease because they're in too long of a line, and having a second bay can alleviate something like that. The reason we're bringing up the single bay model is, one, someone is going to be the surviving entity when it comes time for electric vehicles to have a majority place in our world. And it's not going to be the facilities that have a $15,000 to $20,000 a month rent, because there's just not enough maintenance on those types of cars to justify that kind of model. Our car count is significantly less, and Michael can share with you. We have a industry-wide study called from the National Oil and Lube magazine, which is basically our industry's version of Restaurant Week, and it has the numbers that you're looking for. And so our model can sustain significantly lower numbers than what other models can. That's the whole genesis of this idea in the first place. So Michael will email you that PDF, and it will share all of the industry averages, ticket averages, how much of 530, 020, that sort of things. And from there, you can kind of have an idea. But the single bay allows us to go into real estate that otherwise quick loops have never been able to go into, because the footprint of these buildings are so much smaller, right? If we can go into 2 shopping centers on each side of a mid-sized town of 50,000 people, that net should be the same expense as doing a 2-bay facility in the middle of the town. And with 85% of your customer base coming from within a 3-mile radius, there's the opportunity to do that without cannibalizing your own consumer base. But that being said, all other variables equal, if you can get the lease, if you can get the same lease payment, if you can get the space, a 2-bay will always be superior. And I don't think that's the case for a 3-bay. I think once you get into 3-bay, then you get into staffing issues, you get into perception issues. I think that the current state of quick lubes, a 2-bay is perfectly capable of handling. You know, I did a 58 car day, just me and one other guy in our Harrisburg store, just the 2 of us, and we handled it perfectly fine. So I think we've also put together a flow chart that allows for less employees, which is a big part of our model versus some of the other brands.
Just one other comment, Dave, quickly. I have been to that single kiosk and seen 7 cars being serviced in 45 minutes. They were domestic cars. I think one of the things that is different is we don't have to put them up on a lift, which takes an extra 2 to 3 minutes and increases your liability. So you do have, I think, capacity. Costa and I have talked about this. I think with some leeway, there are some imports that take longer. It's a little harder to get to the oil filter, but I think, if you were really busy, you wanted to keep your employees busy, 45 cars a day would probably be the max for an 8-hour day. And then of course you could choose to increase the hours that you're open. So
yeah, all of our stores are 9 to 6. We subscribe to a standard work week. It helps with staffing. It helps with staffing morale. We have not been impacted nearly as much as other retail level brick and mortar businesses with this quote unquote staffing shortage, because we have a staffing model that doesn't put pressure on our guys to do things that they wouldn't want to do. And 2, they're not always looking over their shoulder for hitting certain quotas for selling other products. And 3, we just have figured out how to tap into what our guys are looking for and trying to get them what they're looking for, whether it's job security, whether it's just pay, whether it's flexibility on hours. We've really tried to make sure that everybody is catered to based on what their individual needs are, and we have 58 employees, and, I deal with a lot of these employees on a one-on-one basis because, with the modern technology we have, there's no reason you can't reach out on a regular basis to your employees, just check in. And I'll give you one example. Our manager in North for Sales, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh, he's not a guy driven by anything other than job security. And so what I know about him is he's the biggest Pittsburgh Penguins fanatic in the world. And, every year I buy him and his wife tickets to go see the Pittsburgh Penguins for, $60. And that is way more meaningful to him than a $100 Amazon gift card. And when it comes time to come to bat for his boss, he's going to remember those kind of things. And it's a very simple, that's like a really simple tactical thing. But at the same time, like that's the kind of stuff that helps your organization when it comes to these staffing climates. Now, new employees, new stores, you know, we're still working on helping our Mesa store staff up. And it's tough out there right now. And that's any business, not just us. The one thing we do have on our side is the employees typically have an inherent like of the subject matter, meaning, you know, if your kitchen staff or your general labor, construction or something, there's no underlying passion for what you're doing. A lot of the guys that we bring in are car nuts. And so that little level of trade also makes them a little bit stickier of employees as well. I've gone way over my time. I pushed Mike back to 11:30, Michael, but
Okay.
I can keep going to 11:30 because he said that's fine.
Great.
But I do have a hard stop then.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Costa. We do have, I'm sorry, Dave, Barack joined us with his partner, Greg, from Florida. I think now we have enough time for them to ask a question. Dave, did you have one more question?
No, it was just expanding us. So go ahead and let the Barack.
Okay. Thank you. Hey, Barack, good morning. Thank you for joining us, and Greg.
Michael, there was the confusion was, I remember there was a call today at 10:30 and I thought that was our call. And so when you emailed saying, oh no, our call's tomorrow, Wednesday, I said, oh, okay then. And then when I was going through my emails, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, there is a founder's call today at 10:30, but that wasn't, and then so I was like, oh, great, I just missed the first half hour of it.
Okay, we do have a recording, so I can send you and Greg the recording.
That would be perfect, yeah.
Yeah. Do you or Greg have a question for Costa at this point?
No, I'm just trying to listen and get up to speed with some of the material that we just missed here. We've asked so many questions along the way that that I'm just trying to catch up. I just got hopped on like 5-10 minutes ago, right?
Can you hear me, Michael?
Oh, hi. Yes, Greg. Good morning. Hi.
Yes. We are obviously late into this call, so I don't know if this question has been asked already. Is what's the turnover like for employees?
So the manager position is easily the most important job, and it's important to cater to them. And while the full-time position can turn into a revolving door because you want to make sure you have the right people, if you establish early on a culture that is conducive to giving them the tools that they need to succeed, empowering them to do their job without having anyone breathing down their neck, we have not had a ton of turnover. And we have not been immune from the price increasing in labor, because if we do bring on new employees, whether through attrition or through needing to bring on more people because of volume increasing, that stuff gets through internally fairly quickly. And if it goes from, just using central Pennsylvania, for example, I have historically been able to pay our full-time techs anywhere from 10 to 14 bucks an hour. Now we have to offer 14 just to get them to show up to the interview. And I've got guys that have been with me 6 years and they're at 14 bucks an hour, and they say, hey, it took me, 5 years to get from 9.75 to 14. And this guy just came in with no experience or no, relevant experience. Maybe he worked at a Meineke or something, and he's starting off at 14. That reverberates between the internal employees, and I think that's a conversation that gets lost in the minimum wage conversation, because that's the bigger impact than actually increasing the minimum wage itself, is how it impacts the internal employees. However, we've built up a lot of equity with our employees just by treating them right. Our industry has had rampant models of either creating a situation where the employees feel like they're doing something they don't want to do. I know Michael can speak to this because we've had a couple people come through the pipeline that were former Jiffy Lube employees that now want to own their own Quick Lube, and they'll say, we don't want to do that kind of stuff. We don't want to have to pressure someone We don't want to, and there's no shortage of YouTube videos of, you know, the news station having a mechanic change all the fluids right before they come in. And then they put a secret camera in, and then they get told they need new, you know, new power steering fluid, new brake fluid, new engine flush, this and that. And so that very little thing right there has gone a long ways for us not having the kind of turnover that other companies deal with. And it all goes back to reducing the overhead of the operation to be able to not have to be beholden to top line revenue. Our unit economics have the same capability as other quick lubes. However, we want to get there through the service that we provide. We want to get there by throwing as many offers at the wall and seeing how many stick. You know, we would much rather prefer to do warm sales versus cold sales. And when I say that, you know, we have an internal line in our employee handbook that is kind of our motto that says the most educated consumer will always choose us. And so we want to, you know, for a lot of people that don't own a home, their vehicle is the most expensive asset that they own. So we need to be good stewards of their property. And so if we go to a person with a 2017 Ford Focus and tell them, hey, your car has electronic power steering fluid, and they've never, you know, and that's a new thing and they've never heard of that, or your car has a sealed transmission, we really can't take a look at it. And you talk to the customer about their vehicle. And then when it comes time to actually suggest to them a secondary service or a cross-sell item, the conversion rate's going to be much higher rather than, you know, throwing as many offers at the wall and seeing if, you know, a few bite on it. And then the long tail of it is you have a much more dedicated consumer base because you come from an area of credibility versus an area of sales and skepticism. I mean, so many people are already aware before they go into some of the other brands, like they got to get ready for war. Like I got to be able to fend off all of these other offers, and you're prepared for it. So, you know, if you read our reviews, and I suggest to if anyone embodies what we're trying to do, it's the guys at Costa Oil Boardman. If you look at the reviews on Costa Oil Boardman, it just is the epitome of everything I just said, because people are just surprised and delighted. To quote the Zappos founder, to always want to surprise and delight the consumers.
Well, we all want that trustworthiness because most of us don't have a clue about cars. The cars we're driving, we just want to go in and have someone who's honest, which is really hard to find these days, obviously. But the reason I was asking that question about the employees is because if you only have 2 employees working at the single bay and one of them doesn't show up, you kind of cripples the business for the day, or until you get another employee. And if they walk out or quit, or I'm just wondering how it is. Do you have a lot of instances of that, or even
correct? Yeah.
Even just due to health, you know, we had,
and that's a very good insight right there, because I have a handful of guys who I trust to be in the shop by themselves. Not everybody. We will close a store if we can't pull someone from another store. And so when we first got to 3 stores, whenever I go into a new market, whether it's Central PA, Western PA, Youngstown, Cleveland, the optimal market is 3 stores, because at that point you have a territory manager that oversees the stores, you have the store manager, and then you have the full-time guy. And then volume, depending, you typically have a part-time guy, or what I like to have is a floating employee who does 2 days here, 2 days there, 2 days at another store. When you have an isolated store, you are subject to that risk that you just laid out, where if someone catches COVID and they're out, you're shut down for a full week. And that did happen. Right now in Cleveland, the 2 Cleveland stores are 45 minutes away from each other, and it's a real big ask to have someone from one of the other stores travel to the other store for coverage. And so we did shut down Menor on the Lake for a full week when the manager got COVID, because I just did not have the trust level for the full-time guy to run the store, and we did not have the ability to pull from another store. So you can look at it 2 ways. We're in a position now where we overstaff now, because we're in a position where we're capable of doing that. But very early on, you're not able to do that. And back in those days, either myself would go in or we would close the store. And so I don't want to sugarcoat that and tell you there's a better solution, but the only way to do it is either overstaff and then you have an extra guy on staff that you're paying, and maybe during slower volume times, you're in the same boat as Jiffy Lube or Take 5, where you've got a bunch of guys standing around and no work being done, or you can close based on those incidents. So there's really no way around that.
Okay.
Unless you truly have a manager that you trust to do the service. The only thing is you can't check the oil filter and the dipstick, and you need 2 people to be looking at these things in order to have 100% quality assurance. Because
Well, you slow down your guarantee as well if you only have one guy working, I gather.
Correct. That's exactly what we do. And like I said, I only have a handful of guys that I trust to work by themselves. But the first thing that they say is, my colleague called out today, the service might be a little bit slower than normal. And 99% of consumers are going to be reasonable. Some people, it is retail at the end of the day. Some people will be jerks about it. I have to hop. My call's coming through. I apologize, guys. We can.
All right. Thank you, Costa. Dave, and Greg, and Barak, I'll check back with you. I think we have some calls planned.
Mike, give me 2 minutes. I'm wrapping up a Zoom call.
Okay.
I'll call you back. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah.
When I close this meeting out, everyone gets dropped. So let me. Anything you want to say, Michael? I can let you.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to mention we'll do some follow-up calls, and then I know Barak and Greg, I think you're planning to join us March 16th, 17th. So we'll have a couple calls before then, I think. But anyway, thank you for making the call. It's always helpful to hear different questions and how you're thinking, concerns about that you may have. Costa, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, right. And Greg, if you do come to Discovery Day with Barak, one of our territory managers who started out as a lube tech will be in attendance at that Discovery Day, and he was there when he was the only store in the market, and he can talk more specifically about how he combated that particular question you asked. So
Okay.
He's a great resource.
Okay, thanks, Costa.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Greg. Second, Greg and Barak.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye.